Each day comes with new opportunities and new challenges. Managing these stressors can be difficult, and one theme that keeps coming up in our discussions about mental health is resiliency. What is it, and how do we develop it? Today we invited Chris Praetzel, doctoral psychology intern, to answer these questions and explore how we can implement resiliency into our own lives. This is Chris, and Cole. Welcome to the first installment of Relevant Resiliency.
And people coming in and things of that nature.
Yeah, we've been pretty swamped. I'm scheduling people like just all over the place during seminars and other stuff, just to keep people in and regular and getting the support they need. So we're pretty busy.
Well, so like the whole thing we're going to talk about today is resiliency. Hopefully, you're practicing some self-resiliency with everything going on.
You can share that with us because we need it.
I know. Well, it'll be interesting once school, like if they do get back into kind of a more normal schedule in fall, which you won't be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll be gone August 1st.
We shouldn't even talk about this then. But no, it'll be interesting just to see, like compare once we kind of start seeing, fingers crossed, we come out of the pandemic a little bit and we get to a little bit more back to quote unquote normalcy. You know, the need for services, if it goes up, how much it goes up. I would say probably going to go up. You know, people are going to need those services and things like that. So that'll be interesting to compare because I think all the survey results we've looked at through like the ACHA and stuff, that's all pre-pandemic stuff. So could be interesting.
Yep. Yeah.
So, well, Chris, the first thing I want to ask is how do you pronounce your last name?
Praetzel, but I will accept Praetzel.
Praetzel. Okay.
That's what I thought. Do you have a relative named Charles?
I do not think so, unless a distant relative. Do you know where Charles is from?
Because I know another Praetzel. Did I say it right?
Praetzel. Yep.
Praetzel. Okay. Yeah.
There's a bunch of us up in like the upstate New York, like the Buffalo area. So.
How often do you make it up to upstate New York, Cole?
Never.
Yeah.
Have I ever done that?
You took your shot right away. Like, hey, I think we know somebody in common, and that did not pan out quite well.
No, it's worth a shot though.
It's a Kansas trait. It really is. And I know you're from bigger city Kansas, but I know whenever I run into somebody, it's kind of like, what is it? 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Have you ever played that game?
Yeah. Yep.
It's the same thing, but trying to piece people together that you know each other in common.
Oh, you're from Dodge?
Yeah. Do you know so-and-so? No. And then it gets to where like your second cousin's vet's sister's boyfriend's third cousin, you both know. And then it's like, okay, now I can go along my day.
Yeah.
So
but you don't know this person, like they went to this high school.
Exactly.
Do you know anyone there? And
Well, you took your shot, Cole, and you missed. So
sorry, Charles.
Yeah.
That's the guy that I know, not you.
All right. So, well, Chris, why don't we start out just a little bit? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you ended up here at K-State, how you ended up in the field of study that you're in, and anything you want us to know.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in New Jersey and then became interested in my teens in sports psychology.
Okay.
Just really got interested in, the mind over matter concept. So like, what is that? How do people use it? How are people able to just overcome adversity, follow their goals and dreams? And just really stumbled on sports psychology and it just kind of clicked. So like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to get into. So I was a runner in high school and then had decided to follow sports psychology. So did my bachelor's at Arcadia University. It's a small school no one's ever heard of, right outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
So just really loved the field and then was really lucky. I got a scholarship to study sports psych in Europe. So I got completed a dual master's in schools in Greece and Germany. So Leipzig University in Germany and then Thessaly in Greece, which is like dead center. So not right next to a beach, which is typically how I think of Greece, but just really had an amazing time there and was able to just learn from a lot of kind of the top minds in sports psych. So worked with athletes, helping them on the performance side, helping to improve, and then had known I wanted to go kind of the counseling route. a lot of the athletes I've been working with, it seemed like a deeper level of support was needed, a lot of just emotional support, mental health support, and our program was more performance-based. So decided to attend Springfield College in Massachusetts. So had gone there. They had a big social justice focus, which I was passionate about, as well as opportunities with working with athletes, and then was up there for 3 years. And then as part of my program, we have a 1-year internship before the program's completed. And so I had interviewed here with Dr. Cody Walls and some of the other staff, really just loved kind of the feel of the environment and just felt like it would be an awesome place to work. And so decided to come work here for the year.
Wow. So from New Jersey to Europe, was it Greece and Germany, and then back to, was it Massachusetts, then to Kansas? So your interview with Dr. Walls, was that in person or was that virtual?
That was virtual.
So when you step foot in Kansas to come and work here and continue your education, was that the first time you've ever been in Kansas?
It was not the first time I've been in Kansas itself. It was the first kind of instance flying here. I was in Kansas one other time. So actually I did a charity run across the US. And so I ran from California, put a foot in the Pacific Ocean, ran all the way east through to New Jersey for my brother had a kidney transplant. So I passed right through Manhattan. So that's also what drew me here as well.
Wow.
It was back in 2012. So I figured it was about 8 years before I ended up working here, or 7 years before I started working here. Passed through, never knew this is where I'd be living.
That's super Forrest Gump. I've never met someone that's like Forrest Gumped the United States of America.
I am trying to wrap my brain around a run that covered the entire continental United States of America.
I couldn't run home.
No.
I live here.
I don't like driving home, and it's like, I think I can make it to work in 8 minutes. So I guess I want to ask you though, growing up upstate in New Jersey, sports psychologist, did you have any favorite sports teams that you would like to follow?
Ooh, Philadelphia Flyers.
Okay, you were
a big ice hockey fan.
Okay.
So the Broad Street Bullies, so I definitely supported them. And then mostly Philadelphia, the Phillies for baseball.
Yeah.
The wild card though is the Oakland Raiders. So I was a Raiders fan before they moved to Vegas. So yeah.
What got you into the Oakland Raiders?
So Rich Gannon, one of their former quarterbacks, he went to University of Delaware, which wasn't too far from me. So just kind of looked up to him and just kind of fell into the Raiders Nation.
We'll have to do a little fact check, but I believe Rich Gannon also played for the Kansas City Chiefs for a part of his career. So we'll fact check that at the end.
Don't look at me. I have no idea.
Well, I think so.
I think so
sounds
too.
Valid.
Well, that's amazing. Like I said, you've covered so much across the entire globe. I don't know how else to put it, but that's awesome. So you kind of answered a little bit, about how you became interested in resiliency, or in resilience. Did having that? So you said you were a runner. Obviously, you ran across the United States of America. Do you think that kind of kindled that passion for sports psychology? Did that help it out at all?
Yeah. I was using sports psychology every day. So between a lot of the sports psych is like psychological skills training. So that includes like resiliency, self-talk, confidence building, goal setting. So I would wake up and have to use that every day when, I was running 20, 30 miles a day, and just kind of, it would feel overwhelming when you see I've got 7 states to cover before I see an ocean. So just kind of breaking it down day by day and chipping away.
I got 7 states to cover. That sounds like a summer vacation that we're flying to or driving to. I got 7 states to cover in the next week. But Chris over here saying he's got to run those 7 miles. Man, that is amazing. That is fantastic. So you like I said already, this is resiliency is what we're talking about here. I think this is going to be part of our section of this podcast. We're going to call it relevant resilience, just to give people some tools, some tips, some ideas on how to use resiliency as students while they're at K-State and beyond. And so with that, I was wondering, can you give us just, what do you mean when you say resilience? What's your definition of resilience?
So resilience is a term, and that's thrown around a lot. And, we think a lot about resiliency often comes with like a layer of failure, a layer of like bouncing back or kind of overcoming adversity. So when I think of resiliency, it's, persisting towards one goals while also having, overcome challenge or overcome some negative circumstances with things. So the way I think about resiliency is it's kind of two parts. And so first part is this idea of hardiness. Hardiness is similar to persistence, but includes these 3 C's of challenge, control, commitment. So challenge is, leaning into challenge, feeling that one can grow, can flourish through challenges that occur. Control is a sense that, I can control outcomes that happen around me. I can control and work towards my goals and make progress towards them. And then commitment, similar to motivation. I feel committed to working hard. I feel committed to putting in the time, and that within that commitment, I feel it's going in that positive direction, which is going to help me get to where I want to be. And then as well as that piece of bouncing back from adversity is that, challenges happen along the way. It's not a straight shot to success, and that failures do come. And within a sense of resiliency is, bouncing back from those failures and still persisting and working hard towards whatever goals one may be working towards.
Mm-hmm. Something that stood out to me about what you were saying was that like resiliency comes with failure. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times when I think of like succeeding in life, it's about avoiding failure altogether, not like failing and then bouncing back. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. We often think about it like it's kind of this straight line that if I fail, either maybe there's something wrong with me or that, I shouldn't fail. But, if you're here, you failed. And so I think, finding a way of like embracing that and finding a way to expect that at times and not allowing that expectation to fall into, everything I work towards, I expect to fail, but it's rather the sense of having that flexibility and having that sense like there's going to be setbacks. It's kind of the reality of it. Let me expect the best, work towards the best, but be flexible within that plan to make adjustments as things come.
So there's a balance between like always expecting failure and always expecting success.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I do like the hardiness part of that. I think that's some of the first time I've heard that when it's been with resilience is hardiness.
Because isn't hardiness, and correct me if I'm wrong, a term that they use for like plants and how well they can weather the winter? I don't know.
I'm going to say maybe. When I first heard it, I thought of Hardee's, the place to eat.
Oh.
But no, I don't think that's what we're talking about.
No.
But I did. So my previous job, I worked for the Army. And they have a big resiliency program called Master Resiliency Training, and how they train their soldiers in resiliency and with positive psychology and things of that nature. And I'm thinking back, I don't think, and this course has been many years ago, I don't think hardiness was ever brought up. And so that's what caught my kind of attention towards hardiness plus adversity. I think that's a great way to put it.
And hardiness, it is starting to kind of come to the forefront again. It originally came in like the 70s. There was a researcher, I forget her first name, but Kabasha is her last name. Mm-hmm. She looked at it as more like a personality trait, like people who just have this higher level of hardiness. But what has been more recent, there's a great book that came out in 2019 called Hardiness by Stephen Stein, Paul Bartridge. It's a great resource. And so within that, they're looking more at like building hardiness as well as kind of the contextual aspects of it. And one of kind of the crux of hardiness as well is how one views stress. And so within that, they've found a ton of differences between people in just how they view stress, and those who view stress more positively are those who are viewed to have more hardiness. And the distinction they make is that, how do you view that stress, that challenge? Those that view stress as enhancing. So the sense that I do better because I experience stress, versus the opposite as like stress is debilitating or stress is being something to avoid. They have vastly different outcomes. So those are down even to like the levels of the impact on your body. So in terms of like cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone. So those that view stress as being something that helps them, they have better health over time. Their concentration is better. They perform better by just a simple thing. And that within that, compared to those that view stress as being something to avoid, something to, that harms them, is that they have worse health. They get sick more often. They also are less likely to to persist towards goals.
So is there a way, I mean, and I know I don't think it'd be easy if there is, to kind of switch people's perspectives and views of stress, you know, where you could see it as something to avoid as opposed to something that can help you rise to the challenge and overcome? Is there a process that it can be instilled so people can change that view?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways. One process that comes to mind is, self-talk. That, we walk around throughout our days and, we have that internal dialogue going on. And, our internal dialogue, I think of it like a train. Like that train's going to keep going down the same tracks it's been going on. So, if it's going on that path of like, I need to avoid this, I don't like this, or, I'm not going to perform well because I'm nervous, that train's going to keep going down those tracks. So self-talk, changing that can be a great way to change that perspective. So ways of doing that is thought challenging. So within that, a great way I like to do that is just with affirmations, like identify what are the negative thought patterns that are occurring. Sometimes it can be, I'm going to fail. I can't get a good grade on this test. And within that, just take an index card. On that index card, write down, maybe 3 short statements on there, ones that make you feel more positive, and that whenever, you recognize you're on that train track again, just pull that out. I work with athletes a lot, so I recommend like putting that, in their equipment bag, just pulling that out. For, students, maybe that's putting that in your wallet, putting it somewhere where you're just going to see it more often. Sometimes that can be, putting it on a mirror, putting it on your door. So that way, every time you're leaving your apartment, you see those statements again. And the more, your mind is exposed to them, the more those new train tracks are rebuilt, and the easier it becomes for, that to take that different track with your mind.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. Train of thought.
Yep.
It reminds me, this is going to be stupid, but people listening will know what this is, like Shark Boy and Lava Girl. Either of you
heard of it? Haven't seen it.
Okay, it's about going into your dreams, and one of the places they go is the train of thought. It brought images of that for me.
Nothing. Never heard of it. So now I have something to look up and research when we're done here.
It's something to watch with your kids, maybe. As George Lopez and Carmen from Spy Kids in it, and Taylor Lautner.
Okay, definitely gonna have to do some research on that. But also back to what you're saying about. Is the tricky part, and this is my mind thinking, you say write down those 3 things. People actually have to do that action and make those 3 things a tool for them to use. And sometimes I find the things that I do, somebody can give me something as what seems as simple as putting 3 things on a card and keeping them accessible. So then when I go hit those train tracks of stress and things, I can get it out. But sometimes I find that I just don't do it. I don't know why. I can probably give you 1,000 reasons at the time why I don't want to do that. But to me, the challenge would be just to get people to do that and learn to use it as a tool.
We are creatures of habit. And so it can be very hard to, change those. And within that, just finding a way to make it as simple as possible, as easy as possible. So if you're listening to this now, like just do it right now, take out a piece of paper, write it down, that, doing it in the moment, and then just easing access to it. If you don't want to carry around a card, take a picture of it on your phone. That way you can have that come up, and just building that habit that way.
It seems like in this situation, like negative self-talk is almost a passive like response, but then we're subverting it with an active positive self-talk. Is there, I guess I have never experienced this. Are there people that have passive positive self-talk?
It can be built.
Yeah.
It can be built. So
that's crazy to me. I never even thought of that.
I'm going to tomorrow, Cole, we're going to ask you tomorrow
to write down 3 things.
No, you're gonna do it before we leave today, and I'm not gonna ask you till tomorrow to see if you've done it. And you need to do the same thing to me.
Okay.
And we're gonna see how accessible it is.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it can be built in a day. I'm just thinking like every time that I've thought about it, it's like my passive like self-talk has always been like negative, and I have to like think about challenging it. But I don't know. It's just a weird concept to me that there might be some people out there that like their passive self-talk is positive. But I mean, I've only lived in my own brain, so.
It's true. But no, I'm just going to challenge to see if you've wrote 3 things down. And then we'll bring them down to let Chris evaluate them and see if you did a good job or not.
Yeah.
It's like going to the gym and building muscle. So, the more repetitions you get in it, or you get of it, just be it grows that habit, in the same way, like either like brushing your teeth or waking up with your alarm, going to class, that building that habit over time.
Some people have told me, you can let me know, Chris, that resiliency in general, resilience is like a muscle. Mm-hmm. The more you work on it, the stronger that it can get. So then when you need it, it's there. Mm-hmm. I kind of think about it. I look at it as for athletes, like, there's workouts that they do where they engage certain muscles and they may not use them on every play or on every set or on every lap. Mm-hmm. But then when you need it, there's strength there. And when called upon, it can work and work effectively. Mm-hmm. Is resiliency the same way?
I think so, okay. to an extent. So I think, certainly that it's built over time, it's developed. I want to kind of contextualize it. Kind of the flip side of that is just also disentangling the perspective of like, I always need to work harder, mm-hmm. that we can also experience burnout. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes when individuals, come to me and say like, I want to build my resiliency, I'll usually start on the burnout side. Because when we feel burnout, that sense of emotional, physical, mental exhaustion, it becomes really hard to be resilient. Mm-hmm. So within that, it's kind of having that foundational support. And so within that, about reducing burnout, sleep can be helpful there. Also, eating. So there's this idea of visceral states that, how we're feeling in the moment, that impacts how we feel. Mm-hmm. And so, if you're hungry, it's like that Snickers commercial. It becomes really hard to focus on the challenges ahead of you. When, you're thinking, I haven't eaten, it impacts our mood as well. So we can find ourselves being either more irritated, sad, stressed, or angry.
So what are some signs of burnout?
Mm-hmm. So with burnout, there's a couple different models. The one I like the best is kind of this 4 area of just this sense of exhaustion. So maybe you're finding it more difficult to get out of bed in the morning. Maybe you're sitting down to study, complete assignments, and just feeling like, I don't want to do this right now. I'm not feeling motivated. Another is a sense of just reduced sense of accomplishment. You might be, getting a lot done in your classes, doing well, but just feeling like I don't do enough or aren't maybe proud of accomplishments. That if you're recognizing your thinking begin to change, that checking in with yourself, am I exhausted? Do I need to rest? Another area is a sense of depersonalization or disconnected, maybe feeling more just disconnected from others, disconnected from your program, disconnected from your major. And then also the final area is just, if you're finding yourself becoming more negative, you're finding things that maybe didn't irritate you as much in the past or causing you to feel more irritated, feeling more irritated with friends, having negative expectations about classes, negative expectations of yourself or the world.
Mm-hmm. So if you find yourself feeling some of those burnout, like some of the things you just mentioned, you're having some of those characteristics, is there a time where, some people can get burnout, and they don't need to seek out any kind of professional help or resources like therapy or counseling. But is there a time where people might think, okay, I might need to reach out and get some professional resources involved? Mm-hmm. When would that time be? If you can answer that, I guess. I
would say if, you're beginning to have that question, I think that's a good idea to, reach out to counseling services or reach out to other resources on campus that, if you're beginning to have that question, it's always, best to, seek out that professional support at that time, especially, if you're noticing it being more than, kind of one day of, having a few days where you're feeling more sad or down or really anxious, or even if it is on that single day of, you're feeling you're overwhelmed or just so exhausted and things of feeling, I should probably talk to someone about that. Would encourage everyone to do so.
What does self-talk look like when someone's burnout? Like how do we shift self-talk when you're experiencing burnout?
So a couple of different ways, and I'll kind of answer what probably my first recommendation with that is self-compassionate self-talk. And so sometimes there can be that idea that, it's becoming more common. You'll see it on social media a lot about that sense of like toxic positivity, this idea of, I say something positive to myself and it doesn't help, or someone's sort of like trying to encourage someone else and just not, being empathetic in the moment. So also, self-compassion, the way Kristen Neff describes it, is a sense not of judging ourselves positively or negatively, but relating to ourselves kindly. And so within that, some self-compassionate talk would be, this is really hard right now. Like maybe I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling exhausted, and just having that recognition and validation for yourself, that can be really helpful and powerful. Within self-compassion as well, there's kind of that 3 areas. The first one touching on is self-kindness. The other is mindfulness. And then the third is common humanity. And so oftentimes when we're feeling overwhelmed or exhausted, we can start to feel isolated. Maybe we can have thoughts like, no one understands this, no one else goes through it. And I also disentangle common humanity within that. It's not the sense that others struggle, so I shouldn't be struggling. What it is this recognition that all individuals go through suffering. So I'm allowed to, just understand I'm struggling now, or I'm having challenges now, and having that kind of validation for yourself can be really powerful because if you're trying to maybe like snap your mind into thinking more positive, that may just create additional sadness or stress of recognizing it being a process and struggles come along the way.
So it seems almost as if like there's 2 forms of self-talk. Like before adversity, that's when you tell yourself like, oh, I can do this, and like, I don't know, kind of that motivation. But then if you're experiencing burnout, that's when that kind of self-talk can turn into toxic positivity. Am I hearing that correctly?
It could be. It depends, on the individual, that each person's unique. But those are some of the themes that we can see. There's also what I would call a third, perspective on self-talk. And so that's this idea, which is called cognitive diffusion. So the way I describe cognitive diffusion, if you think about, in the military, like a bomb diffuser. So, what they're doing, they're disabling that bomb. So, they're going in, they're, like in the Hurt Locker, they're, cutting wires, taking away the power of that bomb. So that's kind of the same thing that can happen with thoughts. It can be a helpful strategy. So we have this belief that like you are your thoughts, and to a certain extent, yes, but it's not the full truth, because you're not every thought. Like maybe, for example, you were driving, someone pulled right in front of you. Maybe you had some anger at them, wanted to maybe hit them or something, but you probably didn't get out of your car and hit them. So in that sense, you're not all of your thoughts. And so what can happen in thought challenging is we can sometimes get in this tug of war with our thoughts. Like, say, for example, you're having that negative thought of like, I can't do this. So you challenge it with, yes, you can. But then that, negative thought comes back again that, no, you can't. And so maybe you spend 10 minutes trying to challenge this thought. And finding it's not as useful. So that's when cognitive diffusion can be helpful. So to say it differently, imagine like your mind is the sky. So within that, the blue sky up above, if you imagine that's your mind, and clouds are your thoughts. So the mind, that blue sky, is always the same, but what changes are the thoughts. And that's kind of the same way what happens with our mind. So, some days like today, it's going up to like 74, it's sunny. So there's kind of like white puffy clouds going through. So that can be our mind at times with those positive thoughts. But then also, there's dark, stormy days here in Kansas, some of those spring thunderstorms and stuff. So, we all go through those dark, stormy periods with thoughts. But, those thoughts are always changing, but that sky's the same. So what diffusion is, it's that recognizing, you don't have to believe you're that thought in that moment. So rather than challenging that thought, is you accept the thought and have it go through your mind. So when I say acceptance, I don't mean that, you believe it or think that thought is always going to be that way, but that's the thought that's there now. And instead focusing back on your tasks at hand. And another way of thinking about it, if you imagine, you're a ship in a storm, so you can either spend that whole storm trying to bail out the water that's, maybe accumulating around you, or you can focus on that sail of sailing out of the storm. So maybe your shoes, your feet might be a little wet, but you're going to come through that storm. As long as you keep focusing on that storm will come out. Or so within doing that, that can be a helpful strategy. So a way of doing cognitive diffusion It's a 3-step process. So it begins with first recognizing that negative thought. So maybe I'm nervous that this exam isn't going to go well. And so within that recognition, you then want to create distance from that thought. So the second step is I'm having the thought that. So by saying to yourself, I'm having the thought that, you're beginning to create distance from that thought to, in that same way, make your mind be back to that blue sky above. And so, for example, I'm having the thought that I'm nervous, I'm not going to do well in this exam. To take that even a step further, that third thought is I'm noticing I'm having the thought that, and within that, by noticing that thought, you're creating that third step of that distance, and then that thought loses some of that power and then redirecting on the task at hand.
So like becoming the observer of the thought in a way like takes away some of its permanence, which is in a sense like believing that something is permanent gives it a lot of power. Because I mean, I don't know anything that's permanent, but sometimes I like to put permanence on things and then they become a lot more powerful.
I think of it too as sports psychology with a sports metaphor. You know, when you watch high school, well, it can be any really age athlete. I think of like college and NFL and things. When the player can start processing things and sees noticeable patterns, the game, they say, slows down for them and it kind of clicks for them a little bit more, and they can have a little bit more control over what they're going to do. They might know where to go and things of that nature. Kind of seems like it could be the same thing with this. You know, you're not going to probably be great or, you know, the best at it right away. It's something you have to work on, and things will slow down and things will click and things will make sense, and you'll learn how to notice it and you'll learn how to use it as a tool and a resource.
Definitely. I think of kind of resiliency, sports psych, of kind of being like a chessboard. And so we have each of these pieces and, you know, they've got certain moves. And so, for example, you know, that rook, that castle in the end can go, you know, the length of the board, but you can only go upwards or sideways. And so within that, these interventions can be helpful in some ways, but they create some gaps. And so the more kind of comprehensive and utilization of these things over time, it can slow it down, so it can make those interventions more effective, as well as having a number of ones that can be useful in the moment.
He plays chess. He runs across the nation. He's in sports psychology. You know, I don't think I could spell rook, and you're talking about the movements on a chessboard, so that's pretty impressive. I kind of want to go back to a couple of things with the 3 C's, because that's something I thought that was really, really interesting. And I kind of want to start with commitment. You know, it seems like, you know, when you talked about commitment, it can be built by considering what is important to you. What does that mean?
And with that, it can connect to a simple but really complex question of, you know, what is your why? So within that, what is your why? Maybe that's your academic program. Maybe it's your meaning to life. Maybe it's, you know, getting through this class that maybe you're having some challenges. But by connecting to your why, it can be really important and helpful in creating that sense of resiliency, because connecting to that why connects to a deep core of who we are. And that deep core of who we are drives a lot of what we do. So within that, that can be helpful in creating that motivation, creating that effort, hard work to, you know, persist even when it's challenging, to keep moving forward. So some ways I do with that of, you know, asking individuals, what's your why, is come up with, you know, a couple priorities, like what are maybe the, you know, couple most important things to yourself now. Also, connecting to your why can also be helpful to, you know, think back at times in high stress when wanting to build resiliency. We can kind of forget about all the things we've accomplished. So, you know, it can be helpful to take that look back of, you know, what have you done over this time with this, and, you know, recognizing our accomplishments, the strengths we showed then. That can be really helpful in keeping that commitment, building that commitment, and continuing to build that resiliency.
Okay.
So the first C was commitment, or I guess, does the order matter with the C's?
Doesn't matter.
Yep. So commitment, challenge, control.
Yep.
Commitment,
You just put them in your own order.
I just put them in my own order.
Hey, that works.
Moving on to challenge. How would you define challenge?
Challenge, I would say, is a sense of that I am pushed, or I am needing to think, or I am needing to really grow through what's occurring. And I also think challenge within that definition is that challenge is necessary for each of us, and that within challenge is seeing change disruptions as opportunities to learn and grow. And within that sense of challenge, the hardiness model uses it in a sense of like low, medium, high. A sense of low challenge is just our connection to challenge. So low sense of challenge is that I'm disconnected or I avoid challenges. High, medium challenge is, sometimes challenge can be useful. High challenge is the sense that I thrive under situations in which I'm forced to think, to grow, to react, and that within that range that can be useful for helping redirect our attention, and that impacts how we just view failure as well. That if you have a high sense of challenge, you're less likely to, walk away when failures occur or if things take longer than expected.
So that brings us to the third C. I believe it is control, I think is the third one. We've done commitment, challenge. So when we talk about resilience and we say control, what does that look like? What does that mean?
A sense of control is the sense that you can create the outcomes in your life. And we have, when we think about control, we have a complex relationship with control, that as people, we want to control everything. And that, in life, there are a lot of things that are outside of our control. We can't control the behaviors of others. We can't always control, the weather, things that happen with circumstances in life. And so we can get in kind of this binary thinking that because I can't control this, I can't control anything. Within control is making choices and accepting responsibility to create the sense of life we would like, as well as this belief that we can create that, and that it may not be this kind of cookie cutter, picture perfect way as we always maybe want it to be, but within that of really willing to put in the time, the effort, and having that belief that, this will pay off, this will build my resiliency, and this will get me to where I would like to be.
When you talk about control, I think about, and something we've talked about with other guests on here, is COVID-19, the pandemic, the control piece of that, some of that is completely out of our control. And we always talk about we've always said, I hope we do a self-reflection after this. And COVID was very challenging, and it still is very challenging, but we've demonstrated some great resilience through this whole thing. And I think when you say control, when you're talking about the 3 C's, I go to that with the global pandemic with COVID-19. That's something we had no control over, and I hope, like I said, we do that kind of that reflection afterwards and do a little bit of an after action review, and we can find how we exhibited our resilience when something was out of our control.
How do we build control? Or is that even the right way to phrase it? Build control.
So that could be done in a couple of different ways. And so that could be self-talk. It could also be goal setting. So goal setting can be a really good strategy as well of, setting step by step, like creating kind of like a staircase of getting to that end point. So within goals, also kind of with COVID of, that was the pieces out of our control. What we could control is, what we do on campus, how we approach classes. And so within that idea of this staircase with goal setting is, what's that outcome? Where is kind of that end point? And really stepping down the staircase and, what are the time goals? So what are the goals for 2 months from now, 4 months from now, 8 months from now to get down to there? As well as process goals. So process goals could be daily goals, it could be weekly goals. It's a sense of kind of, starting these wheels that will get, that will build that commitment, that will build the habit to get to where one wants to be. And as well, performance markers can be helpful. So whether that's connected to those timely ones of just needing to get to that point. So say, for example, I want to run a mile in under 7 minutes. Maybe I'm wanting to get to 9 minutes, maybe in 2 months, get to 8 minutes, and a month after that. And that the process goals could be I run 4 days a week.
That's physically impossible, right? To run a mile in under 7 minutes. No.
What's the record? Like under 4?
Oh yeah,
it's like 3:43. Yeah. It's like insane. They're like flying around the track.
This is another like fact check too, but I think the first high schooler to ever break the 4-minute mile was Jim Ryan from Kansas.
From Kansas.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Jim Ryan. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say that's a fact.
Okay.
Until someone calls me on it.
I'm gonna say that's a maybe.
Yeah. I didn't.
A cold maybe.
I didn't come through as confident as I wanted to. Well, so kind of moving on, there seems to be like 2 different parts of resilience: persistence and bounce back. I think you've mentioned both of them. Can you tell us a little bit more about the difference?
So persistence is this idea of continuing to push forward, kind of these 3 C's of hardiness, how we view stress, sort of this idea of keeping moving forward. But this idea of bouncing back, I think of it as how one handles failure, and how within that is also, there's going to be times in life where, it just kind of are completely thrown out of whack, maybe needing to kind of completely rewrite your goals, completely rewrite, things that have happened within life. Maybe that can be death of family members. Maybe that can be, failing a class, or something that just kind of completely rocks the world underneath you, that just makes you in those moments shift perspective and grow, and using that to adjust and continue towards that hardiness piece still.
I'm also wondering, so we've talked a lot about like how we build resilience, how we use resilience. Do you have any examples in your own life when these have come in handy?
Yeah. So I can share one example. Was I completed my second master's program. So it was after the one Greece, Germany. I did a master's in Tel Aviv in Israel and conflict resolution. And so within that, I applied to PhD programs. So I thought, okay, I should be able to get in somewhere. I will, be able to get in. And then I got rejected from the schools I applied to. And so within that, I didn't know where to go. So I ended up moving home for a year. And I thought, I'll be able to work for a year pretty easily. And then applied a ton of places, interviewed a bunch of places, and everywhere was like, you either don't have enough experience or you're overqualified. So within that, it was maybe January, February of having living home for a few months, still unemployed, kind of completely out of money. And then went back to actually a job I had held at 17, which is like a convenience store. And so I applied there. They didn't want to hire me either because I was still, they described me as overqualified. And then I had to literally beg for this job, like not hands and knees beg, but I had to, the manager I was speaking to was pretty clear. She's like, we don't want to hire you. We think, you won't work that long. So I literally had to say, please hire me. Like, I will work as hard as possible. Like, I just need to be able to work. And so she hired me, and kind of felt kind of this huge sense of kind of challenge, and that didn't expect it's where I would be at this point, and needing to just continue on at that point. And then I worked as hard as I possibly could, was able to save up, applied to doctoral programs again, did end up getting accepted. But kind of, that was definitely a huge low of, expecting to be in this doctoral program, expecting this next step, and feeling like needing to take, 8 steps back and going back to this job, and things. So that, I think, is one example that comes to mind.
What did your self-talk look like during this time? The good and the bad.
The good and the bad. So I would say good self-talk at times was, you'll figure this out, just push with it, stick with it. As well as I can still remember the first day, like I walked into, this old job, going back there and just kind of saying to myself, like, this is really tough right now. I didn't feel like there was anything I could do to magically shift my perspective on that, make me feel better in those moments, but just kind of accept that, and not acceptance as like a resignation, but acceptance of like, this is the reality right now, making the most of it, as well as a lot of those places. I think the negative self-talk was, applying to these places, thinking I, could make a really big difference there, feeling really excited. And then, them telling me you're not qualified for this, or, we think you're overqualified, so we're going to go in a different direction, of just kind of feeling pretty frustrated of like, this isn't working. I don't know why, like, I'm just not going to get a job. So those were kind of the tougher self-talk times of it.
Something I took out of what you just said, and I think you said you felt a sense of challenge. Typically I would, I like that, but typically I have a sense of failure, but you phrase it as a sense of challenge. And that's where that resiliency piece, you can tell that you've worked on it. It's that perspective, changing your perspective as seeing it as a sense of challenge. I think that's something I found really interesting, because typically people would say a sense of failure. But I like that way you phrase it, as a sense of challenge. And then that's probably kind of the whole goal of resiliency and what we're talking about today, how to see things from a challenge perspective as opposed to, like, set a failed or failure perspective. Anyway, well, I really like that, but I want to ask you, so who is someone that has modeled resiliency for you? Who's someone that you've noticed?
So I think someone that comes to mind, my younger brother. So he had a kidney transplant. So, he was born in 1992 with what's called hypoplastic kidneys, which means his kidneys never developed. So they didn't function properly. And so they knew at birth he was pretty sick, kind of told my parents he might not make it, kind of prepare for the worst. But he was able to get a transplant in 1996. So it was like, I think, going on 4 at that point. But just, having that be part of his life from, the moment he was born, of these concerns about his health, never was down about it, never was negative. He always just had a positive perspective on that, and just kind of this sense of resiliency that, with things needed to be adjusted in school and things like that, he never kind of had a negative kind of outlook on it. And then he had some kind of health issues later on with kind of his skin, and they couldn't figure it out, and it kind of knocked him out from being able to work and things like that. And so I think that was definitely a challenge for him. He definitely had some, times of feeling down, but he would work through that, took the time to accept, not accept in like a negative way, but just, being in that experience, and when having no possibility of getting out of it, and that he was able to then get a job. He had completed college, but he was able to get a job at a local library and get to full-time work, and sort of as his health got better, mentally he felt better too, and kind of like being able to crawl out of, what's occurring, and being to a place of thriving.
And you said, talk about your brother's resiliency that he exhibited, or resilience that he showed, the family resilience as well. It sounds like for the people around your brother, and especially yourself, the resiliency there was also something that came into play as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Most definitely. What are some, you said, what are some ways maybe your brother or your family showed resilience during this, I shouldn't say during that time, because it sounds, but during that time, or, what are some ways people can be more resilient?
I think one way of building resiliency as well is just building a sense of connection with others. I think that was really helpful. Within our family too, is, just talking openly about what's occurring. I kind of think of it like, if you're walking around holding a boulder, and that if you're able to kind of share some of that weight with others, of speaking about those challenges, that can be really powerful and help to make a positive difference there as well.
A lot of our conversation has been about like how people themselves can build resiliency. But if you're someone like on the outside looking in, like if you, in your position, like to your brother, what are some ways that we can foster resiliency in others?
I think to that question, I always think of Brene Brown initially. So some of you may have seen that video on kind of the difference between sympathy, empathy. And I think the most powerful thing you can do for others is to be present, to witness their experience, and that oftentimes in pain, challenge, that it isn't about like saying the right thing or doing the right thing, but just being willing to witness and be with individuals during that time. I think people naturally are incredibly resilient. So I think if we're able to, be with them and just be present, speak with them in those moments, that can really go a long way.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we said earlier when addressing burnout was self-compassion, but I guess just compassion when someone else is experiencing burnout can be really helpful as well.
Yeah.
We show the Brene Brown video, Sympathy versus Empathy, and just about 85% of the trainings that we've done this semester.
I've seen it every day, probably for like the last 2 months.
And when you say that, it encourages myself, and hopefully it encourages Cole, that, something that we're trying with our student mental health outreach group, the Thrive Navigators, is what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish when we go out and do a presentation for a group, the Navigators, and when we present to a group, we're trying to instill in people how to first recognize somebody that may be in some kind of distress, especially mental health distress, how to communicate with them, and then exactly what you're saying, how to be there with them. I think I'm going to say this the wrong way. So Cole, you're going to need to maybe help me, but Cole's got a part in the presentation we do in the Navigators that covers, they know the situation they're in, and so let them be the expert in it. Does that sound right?
Yeah, so I kind of like to think about it as if you were talking to, even yourself, like any subject matter expert, somebody who knows a lot about the field of study that they're in. Like, I'm never going to tell a rocket scientist how rocket science works because I'm a social worker.
Yeah.
And so it's best to learn from other people what their experiences and what their field of study is. So I don't know, just asking questions and not expecting yourself to have the answers that are supposed to be theirs anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, good.
I think one of the most powerful things you can say to someone in those moments are, this is really tough right now, or this is really hard right now. And that can, make a huge difference.
I've kind of, as we've been talking, been splitting them up into like 3 categories. So like we have self-talk, which is like positive reaffirmations of yourself, then self-compassion, and then cognitive diffusion, which I kind of like colloquially named like distancing yourself from negative thoughts. And it seems that self-talk is maybe the most prevalent way people think of dealing with adversity, or the thing that, I don't know, comes most from the outside. But like, it seems that self-compassion and distancing yourself from negative thoughts, at least for me and people that I've talked to, seems to be more difficult than this self-talk portion. And almost that self-talk is built on top of a pre-existing like cushion of compassion for yourself. I don't know if that makes sense.
That was a big word, colloquial. Did I even say that right?
I know it's honestly, because like colloquial is like layman's terms, but it's too big of a word to be. It's like an oxymoron, because whenever you use it, it's not a layman's term. But
no. What you just said there, Cole, and what I thought was interesting was, self-talk. I think there's a lot of information. Like self-talk is something people have heard of before. So it's easy to get behind that. It's easy to understand a little bit about self-talk. But that self-compassion, things like that, there's maybe not as much knowledge out there. And that's why it's great that Chris came on here and brought it up and talked about it, because that's what we want to do. We want to introduce new ideas, new concepts to people, so they can try to integrate them into their lives, and so that's what I think is exciting. I'm really excited about that.
I like to think of it sometimes too as like a music library, like the different skills we have and the different skills we use. So like, I like Owl City a lot, which is something that if you were like in elementary school during the early 2000s, you'll know. But I still enjoy Owl City. But Owl City is not an artist that I can listen to 100% of the time. I cannot survive just on Owl City music. I need like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. I need Paramore. I need Lizzo sometimes. But I can't always be listening to one person, and I can't always be using one, I guess, resiliency skill.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I try to use self-talk as the only resiliency skill, when self-compassion and cognitive diffusion are also very useful.
That's a great way to put it. So we've been going for almost an hour. And I feel like we've covered a lot about resiliency and resilience, and we've given people a lot of things to think about, tools, tips, and resources, things of that nature. But Chris, we're going to turn it over to you. What final words would you have? What is something that when people listen to this, is there a takeaway that you're thinking or anything you want to make sure that you incorporate into this episode of Thrive at Kansas State University?
And I think within that, Chris, if looking to build that really deep sense of resiliency, feeling really rooted in that and developing towards your goals and, creating that as part of a lifestyle, I think the foundation within that is taking care of yourself. And so within that, that's, getting enough sleep. That's also eating a positive diet. So getting those 3 meals a day, as well as staying hydrated, avoiding overuse of substances. And so within that, if you have that foundation built, that makes it a lot easier to develop these skills. And I think, starting there and having that build upon itself, that will provide, I think, the kind of largest aspect of difference in that, as well as taking breaks. I know more recently there's been perspectives on like no days off, working 7 days a week. That is a direct direction to burning yourself out. So taking time to rest as well, taking breaks, doing things you enjoy. I think those are foundational to building resiliency.
Take care of yourself. Every podcast that we've had guests on, subject matter experts, that's always been a common theme so far. Then it just shows how important it is.
Yeah. Pour from a full glass.
Yep. Well, Chris, we really, really appreciate it. This has been great. Again, this is going to probably be something that we play during our resiliency month called Relevant Resilience. Just to set a good baseline and to give people ideas and a good foundation on what resiliency is, maybe what it isn't, but also how to build resilience in one's own life. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both.